So we're very pleased, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Tim to the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, Tim Brown. So I think the first question really, Tim, would be, I'm interested, and I think you alluded to this yesterday in a previous conversation. When did you first come up with the ideas around change by design and design thinking, and how was that formulated?
You know, I don't think I would claim that I or we or anybody came up with the ideas of design thinking, really. What we found was we were getting these questions. I was getting these questions about how do designers do what they do, and it got easier and easier to describe that, not just by talking about design, but we just kept putting the word thinking behind the word design, because we just haven't, being asked to describe our approach to the world, it was just easier to talk about design thinking than it was to talk about design, because when you talked about design, people would start thinking about the stuff. You know, they start thinking about chairs and tables and water packaging and all that, and that's all good, but it didn't help describe what it is we did as designers. Anyway, so that's where the term design thinking came from, and you know, after that, it was I suppose it was a bit of an anthropological exercise of trying to figure out, well, what actually do designers do? How much of that is universal? How much of it's shareable? How much of it's describable, so that others might do it? Because the interest that I've always had, really since I first discovered design at art school when I was a 20-year-old kid, was what would it take for design, the influence of design to spread far more than it had done historically up to that point. I mean, I always love the great designers. I mean, I love the Bauhaus, I love people like Dieter Rams, I love Charles and Ray Eames, all of these designers that had fundamentally improved the state of the world by doing wonderful work. But it had always struck me that there were challenges out in the world that looked like design problems that designers weren't tackling, mostly because there just weren't enough designers, right? There just weren't enough of us around. And so I'd always been interested in what would it take to kind of unlock that for more people. And so describing what designers do and how designers think seemed like a sort of a useful exercise. So anyway, that's where it came from.
So leading on from that, so in your view, or perhaps what is design thinking? So is it a mindset or a process or both?
Like all words, they can be twisted whichever way you want or aimed at whichever direction you'd like. But the way I think about it today is we actually talk about two things which are very related to each other. One's a mindset and one's a tool set, right? And I think it's actually easiest to think of design thinking as a tool set, right? That it's, to use your terminology, a process. The reason I don't like using process all that much is because we tend to think of processes as being kind of linear, directed things. And what I believe is true of design thinking is that it's not a linear process. It's a somewhat chaotic process. It's iterative, and it has other kind of qualities about it that that I would prefer people not to think of as I do this, then this, then this, then this. Indeed, David Kelly, who's been my longtime colleague and was the original founder of IDEO, has just written a little book on the topic of creative confidence. And what creative confidence is the sort of the natural talent that human beings have to come up with new ideas, but then the confidence to act on them. And so one of the things that I think often obstructs people when it comes to really exploiting the tools of design thinking, is a lack of creative confidence. And most of that is to do with the fear that we often naturally have to act on our ideas. So you need a creative mindset, and then you need a tool set in which to act. And I think design thinking is a very useful tool set to act, very useful tool set when you're trying to solve new problems, create new choices for other people. There are other tool sets, the sort of the tools of artistic creativity, the tools of music and dance and other kind of creative tool sets which can be useful for other things. I think design thinking is useful in a very specific set of circumstances.
So there you talk about design thinking potentially being non-linear. I think you used the word chaotic. In a world where we're regulated, there are people I know here from banks, from banking sector, where the idea of chaos is certainly a bad idea now. If it wasn't before, how do we sort of solve that? How do we use the positive of design thinking within that kind of controlled environment?
We live in a highly complex, highly volatile world where nearly all processes are nonlinear, right? And there's a whole body of science, the science of complexity, which tries to understand the world as it actually is, which is where much of our ideas about non-linearity have come from. And it turns out that our financial systems operate that way, our social systems operate that way, our environmental systems operate that way. And so I think we've lived through a time, one might argue it's since the Enlightenment, I guess, since the discovery of the scientific method, where we operated under the delusion that we could control the world and that we could order the world in very simple ways, and that we could solve the problems of the world in simple, kind of analytical ways, and that turns out not to have been true. And so, whether or not we have all the mechanisms yet that we ultimately need in order to live comfortably with chaos and live comfortably with complexity, that's another matter altogether, and I don't think we do have. But to try and force the world into simple, linear kind of modes of operation has been proved not to work time and time and time again, right? So I think it's about time we give up. It's like the definition of madness is keep doing the same thing, expecting a different outcome.
So if we move on now, we'll talk about IDEO as an organisation, as a firm. In your time with IDEO, from its foundation and to where you are today, what has been the major change you think that's both either affected IDEO internally or externally, or the attitude towards design or design thinking?
Well, I mean, we've been extremely fortunate at IDEO. I mean, I think there's a lot, as I suspect there is in all organizations that have sustained over time. I mean, when I went through design school, we just spent the last 100 years carving design up into a whole series of disciplines. I studied industrial design. My pal might have studied graphic design. Somebody else might have studied vehicle design, and we all lived in our little silos studying our own topic. Never mind whether we talked to the engineers or the marketing folks or the social scientists. I mean, boy, they were in different buildings on campus. We certainly didn't talk to them. And there was something about being in the valley at the moment where we were there, where this crashing together of different disciplines was happening in business, right? It was happening in these startups, and it made a ton of sense to have it happen in design. And so David Kelly, Bill Moggridge, those of us that were around when all of this was happening, it just made sense to start to think about design as an interdisciplinary activity rather than these very narrow disciplines. And so when we formed IDEO in 1991, really the innovation then was to say we can bring a creative engineering organization, that was David's company, with an already interdisciplinary design organization, which was Bill's, and then Mike's, the other third company was an industrial design company, but we already had social scientists, we already had engineers, we had designers. We could bring those together and we could solve a whole bunch of problems for ourselves and our clients, right? I mean, because what our clients used to complain about was that they'd come to the designers and get the design, they'd go to the engineers and get the engineers, and of course, the engineers and designers would blame each other when things didn't quite work, and the clients would end up picking up the tab, and they weren't so keen on that, and so we solved a whole host of problems for our clients. But more importantly, new design challenges it became possible to tackle new design challenges, things that were technically complex, but also real design problems for people. And so that was if there was an innovation in the formation of IDEO, that was it. But what happened after that was a journey that I don't think we could have ever predicted, which was some of our clients, who were a lot smarter than we were, started coming and asking us questions which it never occurs to us to ask. They started coming and saying, that's interesting. You've designed that laptop and that piece of medical equipment and this and this and that. And do you think you could take that approach and apply it to my service? Hadn't thought about that. We could try that, and it turned out that we could. And some even smarter CEOs came along and said, it's interesting, I really love the way you design innovations for me, but what I really want to do is make my own organization more innovative. Can you help me with that? Not really thought about that. Maybe we can. And we weren't very good at it at the beginning, I will admit, but now we're actually quite good at it. Now we've actually figured out that we can help organizations. Our world, the world in which we operate at IDEO these days is just so extraordinarily broad, which is something I love. And we get asked to participate in, a range of design challenges that I could never have imagined 10 years ago or 10 years before that. And so it's really cool. It's really exciting.
So I think, and one of the perceptions would be that you hire designers from design skills, but that's not the case. Correct?
Well, we do, but that's only a small portion of the folks that we design. And I stopped counting the number of disciplines we had at IDEO when we got past 60. Now, obviously, and there are some very important core kind of disciplines that we do hire a lot of people. We hire a lot of product designers, we hire a lot of industrial designers, we hire a lot of smart people with technical backgrounds, we hire a lot of people from the social sciences, we hire a lot of people who are entrepreneurs and from business backgrounds. Often they've also got design backgrounds or engineering backgrounds as well. But on top of that, we have an extremely broad and diverse group of people. We have practicing physicians who come and work at IDEO because we do so much work in healthcare. We have writers, filmmakers. We've had professional chefs working at IDEO, and not cooking for us, but actually working on projects. We have food scientists. We have behavioral economists. We have biologists. That's the most recent discipline that we've got quite excited about. IDEO is the science of biology, and we're starting to bring people with biomimicry backgrounds, genetics backgrounds, because design is moving into the biological sphere very quickly. The way that we think about design is back to this kind of chaos non-linear thing. The science of biology, I think, is the science that's best equipped to think about a complex world, more so than the sort of mechanical or physical disciplines. And so we're starting to bring biologists into IDEO.
And once people are in IDEO, you have, I understand, an organization development model, a way you bring people through.
Well, I mean, that's evolving all the time, and we're getting better at it thanks to people like Andrew, who runs our team here and who's an organizational design expert and helps us extract ourselves from the mess we sometimes get ourselves into. But yeah, I mean, we try and make IDEO a creative journey for anybody that comes to IDEO, and that includes our clients as well as ourselves. We have this concept of journeys. In design, journeys are a very important concept because they help remind you that every experience is a story, right? That you never do design a thing, you design an experience, even if it's a product. And careers are journeys just like anything else. And so we try and be conscious about that. We try and design our own organizations such that young people can come to IDEO and maybe spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years with us and kind of get a graduate degree in design and innovation, and then go off and do interesting things if that's what they want to do. Others stay a lot longer. Some of us stay most of our lives. And, but yeah, we do. I mean, we're starting to think. I think as we get larger and we spend more attention on it, we're starting to get smarter about how we do our own sort of training and learning. And so, joining the company, I came as an industrial designer. I thought I knew what design was, and suddenly I find myself working with psychologists and anthropologists. We do have a lot of people who come to IDEO who 5 or 10 years after they've joined us have kind of moved to almost a completely different discipline from where they started.
So I think linked to that, and it's relevant to our context, is we're often asked, can't innovation be taught? And if so, what are the skills you are going to teach me? It's a very Singaporean question. What are you going to teach me? Over to you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's self-evident that they can be taught. I mean, I think that there are natural talents that people have that give them learning advantages, but I haven't yet come across any aspect of design thinking that you can't teach people. Now, the challenge, of course, is actually not so much the teaching, it's the mastering. And design thinking is not an intellectual concept that once you understand, you can expect to practice at the very highest levels. I mean, it would be a bit like taking a music theory class and then expecting to be Beethoven. That would be a little unreasonable, and I think that's true of design thinking also. And so there's a commitment to mastery that anybody that really wants to practice needs to have, right? And the different skills, so I mean, if you think about, there are the skills of design thinking that are to do with empathy and understanding and the insights that come from learning about people. And mastering those skills, the skills of inquiry, the skills of vulnerability, the willingness to go out into the world not knowing and to meet people and work with people and watch people and interact with people in such a way that you gather really valuable insights. They are skills which can take whole careers to master. And then there are the skills of conceptualizing, the skills of kind of dragging ideas out from a mass of insights that you might have had, of visualizing those ideas, of bringing those ideas to life, of perhaps making them tangible in the world through prototypes. I mean, again, there's a whole set of skills that can take a lifetime to master. And then there are the skills of storytelling and the skills of collaboration and the skills of managing ideas through that long and treacherous process of implementation. I mean, there's a lot that needs to get done for something to go from non-existent as an idea to being something that operates in the marketplace. There is nobody that will master all of those skills to the highest degree, which is why design is a collaborative activity, right? It's why it takes many people. But I think that any of those skills is possible to master them. I mean, I certainly know designers who seem to have this kind of unnatural ability to pull ideas out of their head or to describe ideas or to turn an idea into a story that gives them an advantage, gives them a head start. But all of us, it doesn't matter how much skill we have other things that we can master. And I suppose one of the important concepts I would want to talk about when it comes to teaching design thinking is that the mode of teaching it needs to be an experiential mode, right? That it's not, I know there are technical terms from it, and the teachers in the audience will know what they are, and I can never remember. But right, there you go. That's one of the ones I can never remember. But that we just like learning how to play a musical instrument. I mean, it takes iterative practice, right? It takes the experience of design thinking to really master it, and so the sort of, it's why classically design schools and other places that have tried to teach this use a project-based approach, right? You don't use a class-based approach or a case study-based approach to teach design thinking. It simply doesn't work. It might give you some intellectual constructs and frameworks that are useful background, but if you want to teach design thinking, you have to do projects. You have to kind of get your hands dirty. You actually have to really do it. I think that of course makes teaching design thinking expensive, because that's an expensive form of education, but it's necessary.